Hi everybody, it's Laura. Thank you so much for joining me on my channel. Today I have a layout that I made using the June Shimmerz Paints Color Kitz collection. I'm starting off with a piece of gessoed cardstock, and then I'm using 2 Shimmerz paints and a brayer to spread those paints around. I'm just looking for a subtle look in the background. And I did this because I didn't want the background to be white. I wanted to start off with some color in the background. So I used 2 paints. One is a color splash, and that's called Whites of Their Eyes. That's the one in the spray bottle. And then the smaller paint is a Shimmerz called Lilac Blossom, and that was included in the June kit. This video is a little bit longer than most of my process videos. I usually try to keep them under 18 minutes or so, but there were just a lot of steps to this particular layout, so hopefully you'll be able to stick with me for the whole process. So after I added the paint to the background, I wanted to add some stamping. A little bit of the stamping is visible in the final layout, but not too much of it because I end up adding a whole lot of stuff to the background. But I do like to stamp anyway, and you never know what touches are going to show. I was looking through my stamps and I found that I had a number of Bow Bunny stamps that had a lot of nice textures on them. So I started off with some little tiny circles. I thought that those could look kind of like bubbles, a little bit like an ocean. And for those, I use Archival ink and the color is Aquamarine. And then I found these larger, definitely not just circles, but actual bubbles. And I stamped those on using Staz on ink in Caribbean green. And then I also wanted to add some of this netting look to the background. I think it might be kind of like chicken wire / netting, but I thought that that would be a nice little touch. So I used some Archival ink in coffee to stamp those images. And looking at the finished layout, it seems like this netting stamping is the one that's the most visible. I think those circles and bubbles kind of faded in with all the blue that I put into the background. This layout definitely evolved. I added layer after layer until I got it the way that I wanted it to. It wasn't one of those layouts that came together quickly. Now I'm using a Crafters Workshop stencil, and I'm also using some, I believe, Crafters Workshop modeling paste because I wanted to add some of these plants to the background. In my mind, the background of the layout was going to look like the ocean, like an underwater kind of scene. And so that's what I was trying to achieve here. So I added this entire image of the plant on the right-hand side and then also on the left-hand side. And then I also had another stencil in my stash that has some coral on it, and these are on a much smaller scale than the plants that I just added. So I wanted to add a couple of these around the background too. So that first round of stenciling, those larger plants, those are already dry. I don't remember if I waited for them to dry or if I used my heat tool, but it's definitely a good idea when doing a lot of stenciling on the background, especially with modeling paste, that you make sure that it's dry before adding more layers because it's very easily smeared. So I had another stencil that had some small coral shapes on it, so I decided to add some of those too. I'm just trying to have a lot of texture and a lot of interest in the background, and like I said, I wanted it to look like under the sea. So I love scrapbooking summer layouts, especially beach layouts. And I'm finding that since we haven't really gone to the beach in a long time, I am running out of photos to scrapbook. So I definitely think it's time for another trip to the beach. We haven't been there in a while. But now the modeling paste has dried and I'm going to start adding some color to the background. So I'm using 2 of the paints that were in the June kit. I use a Vibez called Jeni Blue, and then I also use a Spritz called Walkin a Tight Heliotrope. And I'm really just experimenting with the color. I'm spraying it, adding some water to it, and then going back and adding some more layers of paint. I'm just going to see what happens with the paint. I didn't really have a clear plan, but I knew that I wanted to use these colors. Now I'm adding a Shimmerz called Peacock's Plume. This is another one of the colors that was in the June kit. I added a little bit of water to it, and now I'm using some plastic to spread it around the background. And this plastic is bubble wrap, and it makes a different look. It depends on how you use the bubble wrap. You can sometimes create little circles, but in this case, you really can't see the circles clearly, but it does create a different effect than just using a flat piece of plastic. So I thought I would try this out. So I could not decide what I wanted to do with those images that I made with the modeling paste. At first, I was thinking maybe I could make them a little bit darker than the other images and have them stand out that way. So here I'm using a paintbrush and I'm spreading around some of the Peacock's Plume on some of those plants and coral. But as I was doing it, I was thinking this is not exactly the look that I was going for. I don't think that adding this darker color took away from the layout, but I decided that wasn't the image that I wanted to have. So I was thinking that I would use this beautiful color. It's a new color from Shimmerz. It's called Stay Golden, and it is a Shimmerz. And it is like liquid glitter. It is so amazing, so cool, so glittery and shiny and gold. So I thought, oh, maybe I could make the coral this color. But I had already added a lot of color on the background, so you couldn't see the color as clearly as I wanted to. So it didn't really create the effect that I wanted. I did use it on my first layout, and I was able to create some really, really cool golden effects with it. But like I said, because of the other paint work that I'd already done, that wasn't going to happen here. So then I thought, why don't I make all of them white? So I got my heavy gesso, and I'm using a regular sponge dauber that I normally use for inking edges. And I kind of liked the way that that looked, but it wasn't white enough. So then I just took a different direction. I decided to go into the background and add some purple to the background. I'm once again using the Spritz Walkin a Tight Heliotrope, and I'm adding that with my paintbrush. And I didn't know that this was going to happen because I didn't plan on adding as many embellishments as I did in the end, but most of this purple is going to get covered up with my photo and with the embellishments. And then after I added the purple paint, I went back in with some more of the Jeni B blue, and I sprayed that on the same areas where I had it. I just wanted to make the color a little bit more intense. So after drying the background with my heat tool, I decided that I did want to go in the direction of making all of the plants and coral white. That would help them to stand out. So I'm once again using my dauber. I thought that if I put several layers of paint on the background that I could build up the color. And this did work to some degree, but I wanted it to be a little bit lighter than it came out. So I didn't use a very thick layer of modeling paste when I created these images. So if the image was a little bit thicker, then it would be a little bit easier to apply the paint just on those areas with the modeling paste, but a lot of the paint got onto the background too. So I was happy with the way that it was coming, but I did want it to be a little bit more noticeable. I wanted the images to be a little bit clearer. So I added some white splatters because I usually do that anyway. And then I was thinking that I could probably get the plants and the coral to look a little bit lighter by adding some metallic luster. And the color that I used is white frost. So the white frost did help the areas to look a little bit whiter and definitely gave them a really nice sheen. So I was happy with that, but I think I was still looking for them to be even a little bit more noticeable. And then I was thinking that I liked the way it looked with the Stay Golden color on there in a few spots. So I thought that I would add a little bit of the metallic luster in Gold Rush to the background too. I was really just experimenting at this point. I also wanted to add some splatters of the Stay Golden, and that's the Shimmerz paint. So I added some water to the cap of the paint, and I am using my small paintbrush and some scissors to add a little bit of sparkle all around the page. And this paint color is just really, really beautiful. It only takes a little bit of it to make a really nice impact on the background. And if you look at that cap, you could actually see the paint sparkle. So I really don't think the background looks too terrible now, but I seem to have it in my head that I had to have those areas look super white and make that look super noticeable. Maybe I got a little bit too carried away with that, but that is something that I'm going to address again in a little while. And now I'm adding some splatters of the Peacock Plume to the background as well. Once again, watering down the color a little bit and then using my paintbrush and my scissors to tap on some color. And oh my goodness, I'm in desperate need of a manicure here. It looks like I'm missing a few nails. So I'm back trying to find a way to highlight all of those plants that are in the background. So I started off with this Craft Decor chalk writer, the little visit from Lainey. I don't know if you saw her little paw there. And that worked. And so I covered all of the plants with that. And then I found that I had a white paint pen, and that started off really well, but it didn't really work too well for that long. So I used it the best I could. So between those two items, the chalk writer, which was pretty much like a white crayon, I believe I got that from Dollar Tree, I'm not 100% sure, and the paint pen, I ended up being satisfied with the way the background looked, and I was ready to move on. And eventually, the combination of that crayon and the paint marker made kind of a crackle look on all the areas where I applied it, which I thought was kind of cool. I wasn't upset about that at all. I thought it gave a nice look to the layout. So now I'm ready to start the rest of the layout. I wanted to add some color all around the outside of the mixed media background. So I'm using one of the pattern papers. Sometimes if I've already used part of a paper so I can't gut it to use it for an outline around the outside of my layout, I'll use strips of paper. I sometimes use this method for the entire layout if I want to make a mat for the whole layout, or even if I just want to mat a photo or another item that's on the layout, using the strips of paper and then cutting the edges on angles. It just seems to be a practical way to make a little mat, and it works out really well when you don't have a lot of the paper left. So I'm also adding a piece of purple paper from my stash. I don't really use cardstock so much anymore, but I was lucky that I did have what I thought was just the right color. And I'm just putting a really thin border of that around the outside of the mixed media background. I trimmed the mixed media background down quite a bit, and I also flattened it out so that it would sit nicely and somewhat flat on the other pattern papers that I'm using to mat it. It can sometimes be hard to get all the crinkles out of a mixed media background, but once the page goes into the album, it flattens out perfectly. So I attached the 3 layers together, and I used ATG adhesive for that. I gutted the piece of purple paper just in case I wanted to use that purple paper on the rest of the layout. And I did think that it would be a good idea to make a mat for my photo, since that's the darkest color on the layout and I want my photo to stand out. So I first used some white cardstock to mat the photo, and then some of the purple as well. And then I'm placing my photo on the right-hand side of the layout. And it's a shame how much of my hard work gets covered up, but that's just the way that it goes with mixed media backgrounds. I'm fine with it, and I know that it's going to happen. My concern isn't for that to show, it's for the whole layout to come out the way that I want it. So I'm starting off with a number of the items from the die cut pack. I absolutely love that shell that I put at the top of the photo with the pearl inside. I guess the oyster with the pearl inside. And then there were a number of really cool floral or coral elements that I layered on top of my background, which I thought kind of added to that ocean look that I was trying to achieve in the background. Also included in, I believe, every one of the Shimmerz color kits are what are called dots. They're about 1 inch little, I guess they're kind of like epoxy dots, and I love them. I love the way they look on the background. They're just the right size. So usually I'll put like 1 on a layout, but on this layout I ended up including 2. I have one that's right to the left of my title, which is going to be Mermaid Vibes. And then I'm including another one that says Sippin' on Sunshine. That's a teal dot, and that's to the right of my photo right now, but I'm going to move it down by the title in a little while. I also include a number of the puffy stickers on the layout. I have a starfish in the lower right-hand corner. I'm actually moving it around right now. It moves around a few times before I finally decide where I want to put it. There's also a little shell that's right on top of the title. And I'm also going to be adding a little blue flower. I love those little touches. I think that having things made of different materials on the layout makes the layout a little bit more interesting. So I'm going to pop up a few things on the layout. I already popped up the coral that's on the right, and whenever I pop something up using foam, I like to reinforce the die cut just so there's no bending over time, especially when I put it in the page protector. I don't want the page protector to bend it. So I'll put a little bit more cardstock on the back and then add some foam. And I like the way that just a little bit of dimension, I think, makes the layout look a little bit more interesting. So I finally decided that I wanted to put the starfish on the dot that's to the left-hand side of my title, which it has little like fish scales on it. So I liked that combination. And then I also wanted to add some dimension to the heart that I have underneath the title. So once again, I added some cardstock to the back, and then I added some foam to pop it up a little bit off the page. And I also like to say on every video, because not everybody watches every video, that if you use ATG adhesive to attach something down that's foam, later on you need to use some wet glue because it will not stay attached to your page indefinitely. I just want to make sure that I always say that, because if I don't go back with some glue later on, I do find that the pages don't stay together. And I like to have the option of moving things around. I always talk about that on my videos, but it's not something that everybody cares about. So if you feel happy and content with where you decide to put something, just go ahead and add some wet glue to it right away so you don't forget, like I sometimes do. So I was thinking the layout was done, and then a few days later, I was thinking I wanted to add some elements to it that were a little bit more intense. These colors are so beautiful, and I thought that if I added some die cuts behind what I had already added to the background and layer them on top of that kind of muted background, that it would make the layout look a little bit better. So this isn't included in the kit as far as the dies. I used some dies in my stash, and I cut out a whole bunch of coral and sea plant pieces. And now I'm using those same paints that I used earlier to give them a nice, deep, rich color. I noticed that a lot of the embellishments in the kit had a touch of pink, so I decided to pull in some other colors from previous kits so that I would have some pink elements on the page. So I used a Shimmerz called Pip Pip Cherry O, and I also used a Vibez called Gladiloa, and you could see there that I have a number of elements that are pink, and then I have a couple of elements that have some purple and some pink because I kind of like that combination. And I don't believe that I ended up using all of these on the layout, but I do use quite a few of them. And I wanted to have a variety to choose from because I didn't plan exactly what I was going to do beforehand. Surprise, surprise. I'm not really good at planning pages. I just let them kind of develop as I go along. So now I'm going to tuck all of these behind the embellishments that I already have on the layout. I really don't move things around, or I don't move things around very much. I just want to take what's already there and then add these to kind of highlight some of the elements that I already have on the layout. So I think that if I had known that I was going to add these die cut pieces, that I wouldn't have been so obsessed with making all of the modeling paste lighter and more white, because now it seems like these images are more of the focal point than what would have been the focal point, or maybe not the focal point, but an important part of the background, which would have been those modeling paste plants. So like I've said before, it's just the way that the layout kind of evolved and developed, and it doesn't bother me that I spent a long time doing that. Now I know if I want to make any elements on my background more white, I have to invest in a few paint pens. I had so many white paint pens and so few of them worked, really just that one that I used. So I really have to go through my stash and get rid of some of these things that I've had for a while that really aren't in working order. So now I have all my die cuts tucked behind all the other embellishments, and I'm using some gel glue and attaching all of them down to the layout. And then after I glued everything down, I decided I needed one more die cut on the left-hand side to kind of fill out that cluster there. So now I'm thinking about finishing touches. I love the pearl on that die cut over the photo, and I didn't want to put anything over it, so I decided I would add a little bit of Glossy Accents just to highlight it a little bit, give it some sheen. And now I'm adding these little bubbles. I showed the jar just for a second a few moments ago, and I got these in a thrift store. My kids went through stages where they were constantly going to the thrift store, so I went with them, and I found in kind of the home decor section these little, they're like bubbles, and they're not meant for scrapbooking or for crafting, I don't think. I think they're more made like to go into something in your home as a display. But I thought that they were really cool and perfect to use as little bubbles. And there were like a ton of them. So I also bought a jar to put them in, and I keep them on the table in my scrapbooking room. And I thought this was the perfect layout to make use of these. So I spread them around the background, and I also put some of them on some of the die cut pieces and the other embellishments. And I used Glossy Accents to attach them down. I also wanted to add some sparkle to the background, so I have some sequins. These are just inexpensive sequins. They have kind of an iridescent look to them, which I thought would be nice for a beach layout. And I did the same thing that I did with the little bubbles. I spread them around the background, and I also added a couple of them to some of the die cuts and the other embellishments that are on the layout. And I do think that this added a nice little touch, and they are very sparkly, and I really do like to add sparkly elements to ocean layouts. And there's a lot going on now, but I did want to add a few little pearls to the background, just again, because it's an ocean layout. I thought it would look nice to have some pearls. So I started by adding them as little embellishments to the puffy stickers like the starfish and the shell and the flower. I also put one on that teal dot that says sippin' on sunshine. And then I also added some of them into the background, just like I added the sequins and those little bubbles. And those pearls are the very last element that I add to the layout, and it is finally complete. And if you're still here, thank you so much for watching. I really appreciate you sticking with me through this rather long video. In this video, I was working with the June Color Kitz collection, and I just checked. As of today, it is still available in the Shimmerz shop. It's a really beautiful one, and it's great if you happen to like making summer-themed layouts. So I hope you have a fantastic day. I really appreciate you joining me on my channel, and I hope to see you again soon. Take care, everybody. Bye-bye.